Some stories in Ravenwood don't fade. They cling to the town like fog. This is one of them, the story of a quiet boy. And the night something from the other side reached through the dark and took him. His name was Ethan Vale, but the world would remember him as the Shadow Child. There are places in this world where time refuses to behave, where childhood laughter and old tragedies hang in the air together, refusing to fade. Ravenwood had many such places, but none more whispered about than Pine Lantern Road. It did not look special, a row of homes built in the late 60s, tin mailboxes that rattled with the wind, porches with peeling paint, bicycles tipped over in the grass. But anyone who lived in Ravenwood long enough understood that ordinary-looking places were the ones that hid the deepest scars. Pine Lantern Road remembered things. It remembered nights when the streetlights buzzed for no reason. It remembered mornings where fog pooled strangely around a single house. And it remembered the boy who changed everything, long before the town ever realized he mattered. His name was Ethan Vale. But that wasn't the name Pine Lantern Road whispered when the wind moved just right. It called him something else, something older, something it had waited decades to say out loud. Shadow Child. Before the world knew him, before Ravenwood tried to forget him, Pine Lantern Road felt his presence the way a forest feels a coming storm. Quiet tension, then the slow, shivering shift of the air. On the afternoon everything began. Ethan was sitting on his porch steps, drawing with a stub of charcoal he'd found in the fireplace. His sketchpad balanced on his knees, filled with shapes no 10-year-old should understand. Tilted houses, woods that bent inward, closing around a winding path. Shadows that leaned in directions no sun could create. He wasn't drawing from imagination. He was remembering. Because long before he vanished, long before the lights went dark, Ethan Vale had already been touched by something waiting beneath the surface of the world. At that hour, the sky held a steady, warm glow. Children were riding bikes, wheels spinning over cracked pavement. A radio played from a garage somewhere, the static blending with the wind. But Pine Lantern Road felt wrong. The air was too still, the shadows too sharp. Even the leaves seemed unsure, weighing whether to rustle or remain frozen. That was always the first sign, stillness pretending to be peace. Ethan lifted his head, not because he heard something, not because he saw anything, but because the road itself shifted, ever so slightly. A subtle, unnoticed tremor, like something beneath the asphalt had stirred, turning over in its sleep. His eyes didn't widen. His breath didn't quicken. He simply stared toward the end of the street, at the edge of whispering woods, as if waiting. The breeze picked up then, carrying a soft hum. Not quite a voice, not quite a vibration, a half-formed sound that slid into the air like a thought someone forgot to finish. The hollow often began this way, unseen, unheard, but unmistakably present. Ethan placed the charcoal down and whispered, barely audible, "I know you're there." And Pine Lantern Road, which had pretended for years that it did not notice the strange happenings around this boy, felt a quiet chill crawl along its length, like an old memory resurfacing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the tree line. Nothing moved. Not a bird, not a branch. Even the other children felt it. Without understanding why, they drifted inside their homes, one by one, doors closing, blinds lowering, as if something deep in their bones urged them to leave Ethan alone. The town never admitted how often this happened, how often the children scattered when he appeared distracted, how often mothers peeked from windows, whispering to each other, "He's doing it again." Because even though they didn't see the shadows lag behind him, even though they didn't watch streetlights flicker when he walked by, they felt the truth. Children always sense danger first. Ethan rose slowly from the steps, his notebook falling shut with a soft slap. He didn't blink as he gazed at the woods. The hollow was watching, but not with eyes, through him. The air thickened. A low vibration trembled through the ground, so faint it could be mistaken for distant traffic. But there were no highways near Pine Lantern Road. Ethan exhaled and said quietly, "You're closer than yesterday." His voice didn't tremble, not with fear, not with confusion. It carried the tone of someone making an observation, someone who had lived with this presence long enough to accept it. Because Ethan Vale had always lived between two realities. He just didn't know the cost yet. Behind him, a porch light flickered, then another, then 5 more along the street, blinking in a slow ripple as if something passed beneath them. The shadows at Ethan's feet stretched unnaturally long, too long for the angle of the sun, too dark for the soft hour. He didn't turn to look. He had learned long ago that the moment he acknowledged they were wrong, they became worse. A soft creak echoed from the tree line, not a normal forest sound. This one bent, warped, bending into a dull moan. Ethan stepped forward, just once. The moment his foot touched the pavement, the entire street sighed. A long exhale, as if relieved. Pine Lantern Road knew this boy, knew his presence better than anyone else, because it remembered. It remembered the night a similar presence had walked these streets in 1981. It remembered the blackout of 86. It remembered a child taken before Ethan, whose name was erased from every official record. The hollow never chooses at random. As the sun dipped further, shadows stretched up walls, bending like long fingers tracing every surface. Ethan watched them, head tilted. "I can hear you," he whispered. And finally, for the first time that day, something whispered back, not with sound, not with words, but with a ripple along the ground that only Ethan felt. A promise, a warning, an invitation. The boy turned, picked up his sketchbook, and walked inside. The door closed behind him. The shadows returned to their normal positions. But Pine Lantern Road knew the truth. The hollow had begun to reach for him, and there would be no stopping what came next. Ethan Vale was not born different in any way that could be measured. No unusual weight, no strange birthmarks, no complications that doctors could point to and later blame. But Ravenwood had a way of noticing things long before science caught up. From the moment Ethan learned to walk, the house on Pine Lantern Road behaved differently around him. Floorboards creaked before he stepped on them. Doors groaned open as if expecting him. At night, the hallway light hummed, even when switched off, a faint electrical whisper that followed him from room to room. His mother noticed these things in fragments, never all at once, never enough to sound an alarm. At first, Ethan was simply quiet, not withdrawn, not sad, just observant in a way that unsettled adults without explanation. He would stop mid-conversation and tilt his head, listening to something no one else could hear. When asked what he was listening for, he'd shrug and say, "It hasn't decided yet." That answer never made sense, and somehow that was the most troubling part. At school, Ethan sat by the window, always the window. He liked watching the tree line behind the playground, where the woods began to thicken and the light seemed to dim faster than it should. His teacher once asked him to draw his family. Ethan did. But behind every figure, he shaded a second outline, fainter, stretched, slightly misaligned. When asked about it, he said, "That's where they were a second ago." The teacher laughed it off. Children said strange things. Ravenwood had heard stranger. As Ethan grew older, the town began to react to him in subtle ways. Street lamps flickered when he walked home from school. Radios crackled with static when he passed nearby. Dogs refused to cross the street if he stood on the sidewalk. Animals always knew first. By the time he turned 9, Ethan had learned something most children never had to learn. Some feelings didn't belong to him. There were moments when fear pressed into his chest without cause. Not panic. Something colder, older, as if it had been waiting patiently and simply decided to remind him it was still there. On those days, he'd sit in his room and draw. Not monsters, not nightmares. Maps, paths twisting through forests, staircases that descended into nothing, doors floating in open air, and always a version of his house that looked wrong. Same shape, same windows, but empty, collapsed inward, as if abandoned by time itself. His mother found these drawings once, stacked neatly under his bed. "Where did you see this place?" she asked gently. Ethan didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "I don't see it. I remember it." That was the night his shadow moved first. It happened in the hallway under a single yellow bulb. Ethan stepped forward, and for just a moment, his shadow stayed behind, clinging to the wall, thicker, darker. Then it snapped back into place. He froze. His heart didn't race. His breath didn't catch. Instead, a strange understanding settled over him. This wasn't new. It was just no longer hiding. From that night on, Ethan began to experience what Ravenwood would later call shadow lag, though no one would use those words for years. His shadow hesitated before following him. Sometimes it leaned in the wrong direction. Sometimes it trembled, as if unsure which version of Ethan it belonged to. He stopped playing outside after sunset, not because he was afraid, because the dark felt crowded. Sleep became unpredictable. Ethan would fall asleep in his bed and wake up on the living room floor, or on the porch. Once, at the edge of whispering woods, dew soaking through his pajamas. When his mother asked how he got there, he frowned. "I didn't walk," he said. "I followed." Followed what? He couldn't explain it. Only that something moved through the town at night, leaving impressions behind. Not footprints, not sounds, feelings. Some nights he'd wake suddenly and sit upright, staring at the corner of his room. The darkness there felt deeper, thicker, as if it had weight. "You don't have to stand so close," he whispered once. Nothing answered. But the next morning, the paint in that corner had darkened slightly, like a shadow that never fully faded. By age 10, Ethan understood something that frightened him more than the shadows themselves. The presence wasn't always outside him. Sometimes it felt like it was thinking through him. Ideas appeared fully formed in his mind, not images. Knowledge, certainty. He'd know when storms were coming, when power would fail, when someone was about to fall or drop something, or say a word they hadn't planned. The town called it intuition. The hollow called it resonance. Because Ethan's mind vibrated at a frequency the world beneath Ravenwood could feel. And somewhere far below, beneath soil, concrete and forgotten tunnels, something began to stir. The hollow did not rush. It never rushed. It waited. One afternoon, Ethan stood in front of the bathroom mirror and noticed something new. His reflection blinked a fraction of a second late. Not enough for panic, just enough for doubt. He leaned closer. The reflection leaned closer too, but its eyes lingered on him, studying him as if measuring something invisible. Ethan stepped back. The reflection smiled. He didn't scream. He turned away and went to his room, shutting the door behind him. That night, whispering woods hummed louder than usual. The town slept, and deep beneath Ravenwood, the hollow adjusted its attention. Because the boy on Pine Lantern Road wasn't just seeing it anymore. He was becoming visible to it. And once the hollow sees you, it never forgets. The hollow did not speak in words, not at first. It spoke in pressure, in the way the air thickened when Ethan entered a room, in the way silence stretched longer than it should, in the way shadows gathered like they were waiting for instructions. For weeks after the mirror incident, Ravenwood behaved like a town holding its breath. Electronics failed without warning. Lights dimmed for seconds at a time, then returned as if nothing had happened. People forgot small things, names, appointments, why they'd entered a room. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make the news, just enough to feel wrong. Ethan felt it more than anyone. At school, he began covering his ears during fire drills, not because of the noise, but because of what followed it. The echo lingered too long, repeating, folding back on itself. Sound didn't behave properly anymore. He told his teacher that noise sometimes came before it happened. She assumed he meant anticipation. She was wrong. One afternoon, Ethan was walking home when he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, measured, deliberate. He stopped. The footsteps stopped. He turned. No one there. But his shadow, dark and elongated against the pavement, kept moving. One step forward, then another, acting on a delay, or perhaps on its own intention. Ethan stared at it, heart steady, mind strangely clear. "So," he whispered, "you can do that now." The shadow twitched. That was the moment the hollow answered back. Not with a voice, with alignment. Something deep beneath Ravenwood locked into place, like a mechanism finally finding the correct groove. Ethan felt it in his bones, a low vibration, almost comforting, the feeling of being recognized. From that day forward, the sleepwalking worsened. Ethan didn't wander randomly. He followed paths, invisible ones. He'd wake in the early hours, step out of his house and move through town with purpose. Past the old diner, past the abandoned arcade, toward whispering woods, always stopping just short of the tree line, as if waiting for permission. One night, a neighbor spotted him standing barefoot in the street at 2:13 a.m. His shadow stretched behind him, connecting all the way to the edge of the woods. When asked what he was doing, Ethan said, "Listening." Listening to what? He tilted his head. To the places where time is thin. By now, Ravenwood had started whispering. Parents warned their kids not to walk home alone after dark. Dogs refused to go near Pine Lantern Road. The old water tower groaned even on windless nights. The town felt watched, but Ethan felt guided. At night, he dreamed of places that didn't exist, or maybe existed somewhere else. A version of Ravenwood where buildings sagged inward, half melted, where the sky glowed a dull ash color and lightning flickered red behind heavy clouds. In those dreams, shadows detached from their owners and drifted freely, brushing against him as he passed. They didn't harm him. They acknowledged him. And sometimes he heard it. A presence, not separate from the dream, but woven into it. Not a voice. A knowing. You are closer than the others. Ethan woke from these dreams calm, not shaken, as if they were lessons rather than nightmares. He began leaving notes for his mother. Not warnings, not cries for help, observations. The dark isn't empty. It moves when people forget it's there. I think it's been waiting a long time. She tried to schedule a doctor's appointment. The phone line went dead 3 times before she could finish dialing. That same night, the television flickered to static, then briefly showed a distorted image of Ethan's bedroom from a corner that didn't exist. The screen went black. Ethan didn't mention it. He was beginning to understand an unspoken rule. Attention made things worse. The hollow thrived on fear, on panic, on recognition. Calm made him harder to see, but it also made him more useful. One evening, while brushing his teeth, Ethan noticed his reflection again. This time, it didn't mirror him at all. It stood perfectly still while he moved. Its eyes tracked him slowly, deliberately, not hostile, curious. "You're not me," Ethan said quietly. The reflection tilted its head. "Neither are you," came the thought. Ethan dropped the toothbrush. The moment shattered. The reflection snapped back into place. He stared at himself, breathing slowly, grounding himself the way the dreams had taught him. The house creaked. Deep beneath Ravenwood, something shifted. Elsewhere in town, lights flickered in sequence, one after another, forming a path that led straight toward Whispering Woods. That night, Ethan dreamed of doors, hundreds of them, floating in darkness. Some were locked, some were open. One stood out, old, wooden, warped. It hummed when he approached. "Not yet," the hollow seemed to say, but soon. The next morning, Ethan's shadow split for the first time, just for a second. One stayed with him. The other leaned toward the forest. Ethan didn't scream. He whispered, "I'm listening." And the hollow, satisfied, withdrew just enough to let him breathe. Because this wasn't the night it would take him. This was the night it finished preparing him. The night the window opened, Ravenwood was unusually quiet. Not peaceful, not calm. Quiet in the way a room feels when everyone inside has stopped talking at the same time. Ethan woke just before midnight, not with a start, not from a dream. He woke because the air in his room had changed. It felt thinner, cooler, as if something invisible had slipped inside and displaced the warmth. He lay still beneath his blanket, eyes open, listening. The house creaked once, low and deep, from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Pipes clicked softly in the walls. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but the sound came muffled, distant, as though filtered through layers of glass. Then Ethan noticed the window. It was open. That alone wouldn't have been strange, except his mother always locked it. Always, even on hot nights, especially after the sleepwalking started. The curtain drifted inward, slow and steady, as if being pulled by a careful hand. Ethan sat up. His shadow clung to the wall behind him and didn't move. For a long moment, neither did he. The hollow was close tonight, closer than it had ever been. He could feel it the way one feels a presence behind closed eyes, an awareness without shape. The hum in the air deepened, vibrating through his ribs, his teeth, the base of his skull. Not threatening, expectant. Ethan slid out of bed and stood barefoot on the cold floor. The curtain brushed against his arm. He flinched, not in fear, but in surprise, it felt heavier than cloth should feel, damp, charged. As he stepped closer to the window, the shadows in the room stretched toward it, pooling around his feet. The streetlight outside flickered once, twice, then steadied. Across Pine Lantern Road, a garage door rattled, then another. In 3 separate houses, power tools clicked on by themselves. Drills whirred briefly before shutting off. A circular source spun up, then died. Ethan didn't hear them. His focus was fixed on the dark beyond the glass. The woods waited, not looming, not moving, waiting the way something patient waits. "You're early," Ethan whispered. The air shifted in response. Not sound, pressure. The kind that makes your ears feel full before a storm breaks. From somewhere deep inside the tree line, a ripple moved through the darkness. The trees bent slightly inward, branches bowing as if acknowledging his presence. The hollow was learning how to touch the surface. Ethan leaned closer to the window, and that's when his mother spoke. "Ethan!" Her voice came from the hallway, soft, groggy, edged with concern. He froze. The pressure in the room spiked. The hollow did not like interruptions. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she asked again, closer now. He turned halfway, keeping one hand on the windowsill. "It's closer tonight," he said quietly. She stopped walking. Closer than what? Before she could ask, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the bulb in the hallway burst with a sharp pop, plunging the house into darkness. Outside, Pine Lantern Road lit up in uneven pulses as streetlights blinked on and off in sequence, like something passing beneath them. Ethan's mother rushed forward and grabbed his arm. The moment she touched him, the hum vanished. The curtain fell limp. The shadows snapped back into place. The window remained open. She pulled him away and slammed it, shut, locking it with shaking hands. "What did you mean?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Closer than what?" Ethan stared at the glass, at his reflection. It stared back, but it wasn't alone. Behind it, in the dark reflection of the room, something taller stood, just out of focus, featureless, watching. He swallowed. "It doesn't like when you interrupt," he said. The reflection blinked. The thing behind it did not. She followed his gaze, but saw only their reflections and the dim outline of the room. Fear settled into her chest, not sharp, not sudden, but heavy, the kind that sinks in slowly. She ushered Ethan back to bed and stayed with him until his breathing slowed. The house gradually returned to normal. Lights steadied. The distant hum faded. But Ravenwood did not forget what happened. That night, whispers travelled faster than sleep. Neighbours spoke of power surges, of tools turning on by themselves, of shadows stretching wrong across walls. And, at the edge of whispering woods, something new appeared. A faint path pressed into the ground. Not footprints, an impression, as if something had tested the boundary and decided it was ready. Ethan didn't sleep again that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet return. In his mind, the hollow lingered, not angry, not withdrawn, satisfied, because now it knew exactly where to knock. Morning came without sunlight. The sky over Ravenwood was the colour of dull metal, heavy and unmoving, as if the day itself hadn't decided whether it wanted to begin. Birds were absent. No engines started. No doors slammed. The town woke the way a person does after a night of poor sleep, aware but already exhausted. Ethan noticed it immediately. The quiet had weight. He sat at the kitchen table while his mother poured cereal she didn't eat and drank coffee that went untouched. The radio on the counter crackled softly, never quite finding a station. Every few seconds, a whisper of static slipped through, then vanished. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Something had shifted during the night, and they both felt it, though only one of them understood what it meant. When Ethan stood, his shadow didn't rise with him. It stayed seated for a heartbeat too long, then followed. Outside, Pine Lantern Road looked unchanged, but the light lay wrong on the pavement, stretching shadows too far, bending angles that shouldn't bend. The old water tower loomed in the distance, humming faintly, a sound too low to hear but strong enough to feel in the chest. Ethan walked to school alone. Children usually waited for him. Today, no one did. Windows closed as he passed. Curtains shifted. Dogs barked from behind fences, but refused to approach. The town reacted the way it always did when something dangerous moved through it, quietly, instinctively. Halfway down the road, Ethan stopped, his head tilted. The sound reached him then, a voice, not clear, not close, but layered, overlapping itself, like several people speaking through the same mouth at different speeds. Not yet. Soon. Listen. He pressed his fingers against his temple. I am listening, he whispered. The wind stilled. At school, teachers marked attendance and pretended nothing was wrong. Lessons continued, though no one retained them. Chalk squeaked too loudly. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like trapped insects. Ethan sat perfectly still. When the bell rang for lunch, he didn't move. A girl at the next desk asked if he was okay. He looked at her, eyes distant. Don't go near the woods tonight, he said. She laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. By early afternoon, clouds began to stack low over Ravenwood, dense and dark, moving against the wind. Pressure dropped sharply. Windows rattled in their frames. The smell of rain hung thick in the air, metallic and sharp. Ethan felt the hollow closer now, not beneath, not beyond, but overlapping, bleeding through thin places in the world. It brushed against his thoughts, not as commands, as suggestions, paths. When school let out, the radio in the main office burst into static so loud it cut through the halls. For a split second, a voice emerged, distorted, familiar, impossible. Ethan. Then silence. Teachers blamed a power surge. The storm arrived faster than storms were meant to. Thunder rolled without lightning. Rain fell in short, violent bursts, then stopped entirely. The sky darkened in uneven patches, as if parts of it were being erased. At home, Ethan moved through the house with quiet certainty. He closed doors, drew curtains, stacked his drawings neatly on the bed. Each one showed a slightly different version of the same place. A house, a forest, a door. His mother watched him from the doorway, fear tightening in her chest. Ethan, she said softly, talk to me. He paused. The hollow listened. I don't think I'm supposed to be here tonight, he said. Her heart dropped. What do you mean? She asked. He considered the question carefully. I mean, he said, this part doesn't last. Thunder cracked then, loud enough to rattle the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Outside, Pine Lantern Road darkened prematurely as the storm clouds swallowed the last of the afternoon. Ethan went to his room. He sat on the floor and waited. The radio downstairs turned on by itself. Static poured from the speakers, thick and layered, voices tangled together like a knot pulled too tight. Come closer. You already know the way. We have been waiting. Ethan stood. He felt no fear, only the weight of inevitability. When the first streetlight failed, he was already at the window. When the second went dark, the hum beneath the house deepened. And when the third blinked out, Ravenwood held its breath. Because the last day had always been leading here. The first light failed at 7:42 p.m. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no shower of sparks, just a soft click. And the street lamp at the end of Pine Lantern Road went dark. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then the second light blinked once, twice, and vanished. Then the third. The darkness moved inward, not randomly, but with intention, like a closing hand. Inside the Vale house, the hum Ethan had felt all day deepened into something almost musical. A low vibration threaded through the walls, the floor, the bones of the house itself. The hollow was no longer waiting. It was arriving. Ethan stood at his bedroom window, rain streaking down the glass in uneven lines. Outside, the storm twisted unnaturally, clouds rotating in slow, wrong directions, thunder rolling without lightning to follow. Behind him, his shadow stretched long across the floor. Too long. It reached the door before he did. Across town, lights failed in sequence, block by block, like dominoes falling toward a single point. Phones lost signal. Radios burst into static. Car engines stalled mid-turn. Ravenwood slid into darkness. Ethan's mother moved through the house with rising panic, flipping switches that no longer mattered. The television cut to snow. The radio screamed with overlapping voices before dying abruptly. She called Ethan's name. He didn't answer. When she reached his room, the door was already open. The window was wide. Rain blew in, soaking the carpet, the curtains pulled outward as if by a steady, invisible hand. The screen lay torn on the ground below, carefully placed, set aside, not ripped away. "Ethan!" she shouted. He stood at the window's edge, unmoving. The air around him shimmered faintly, bending the light like heat off asphalt. Outside, the street was empty. No neighbors, no cars, no sound but rain and the distant hum beneath the ground. His shadow peeled away from his feet, just a little. She froze. "Step away from the window," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan turned halfway. "It's open now," he said. "What's open?" she asked. He looked past her, past the walls, the house, the street. The thin place. A sudden surge of pressure swept through the room. The walls groaned, the floor vibrated. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. The hollow pushed. Time faltered. For a brief, impossible second, the rain hung motionless in the air. Each droplet suspended like glass. Sound dropped away entirely. No wind, no thunder, no breath. And then everything snapped back. The blackout completed itself. Ravenwood went dark. From somewhere nearby, a camera whirred to life. A neighbor's old camcorder, left recording by accident, captured the street in grainy black and white. The footage would later reveal something no one noticed in the moment. A delay. Ethan stepped forward, and his shadow followed several seconds later. The air outside the window rippled, folding inward like fabric being pulled through a ring. The hollow opened. Not a door, a distortion, a wrongness where the world thinned and peeled back on itself. Ethan felt it wrap around him, not cold, not hot, familiar, like stepping into a memory you didn't know you had. Behind him, his mother screamed his name. Her voice reached him distorted, stretched, echoing like it had traveled too far. He turned. Their eyes met. For the first time that night, fear flickered across his face. Not fear of the hollow, fear of leaving something behind. "I'll come back," he said. And then he was gone. Not pulled, not dragged, folded. The window snapped shut with a violent crack, shattering the glass outward. The curtains fell limp. The pressure vanished. The hum beneath the house dropped into silence. Ethan Vale had disappeared. Outside, Ravenwood remained frozen in darkness. Minutes passed. Then time stuttered. In 3 different houses on Pine Lantern Road, people reported seeing the same moment repeat, lights flickering back on. For a fraction of a second, rain falling upward, a child-shaped shadow crossing the street twice, a time echo. At 7:59 p.m., the lights came back on. Not gradually, all at once, as if nothing had happened. But Ethan's room remained dark, the window shattered, and the woods at the edge of town glowed faintly red for just a heartbeat, long enough for anyone watching to doubt their own memory. Ravenwood would later insist this night was a simple blackout, a storm, faulty lines, bad luck. But Pine Lantern Road remembered the truth. Something had crossed over, and something had been left behind. Morning returned to Ravenwood reluctantly. The storm was gone, as if it had never existed. No fallen branches, no flooded streets. The sky cleared too quickly, revealing a pale, washed-out blue that felt undeserved after what the night had taken. Ethan's disappearance did not arrive with chaos. It arrived with stillness. Pine Lantern Road gathered early. Neighbors stood in small clusters, speaking in low voices that never quite carried. Some stared at the broken window of the Vale house. Others avoided looking at it altogether. There were no footprints beneath the window, no disturbed soil, no sign that a child had climbed or fallen, only rain-soaked grass and a screen laid neatly aside. People didn't know what to do with that. Search teams formed by mid-morning. Volunteers combed the edges of whispering woods, calling Ethan's name until their voices grew hoarse. Dogs were brought in, but they refused to move past a certain point, whining softly and pulling at their leads. As if something unseen marked a boundary. Maps were drawn, routes assigned. Flashlights clicked on even in daylight. But the search never felt like a search. It felt like motion without progress. People walked, they called, they looked, and yet no one truly advanced. Paths looped unexpectedly. Landmarks appeared in places they shouldn't. More than once, a searcher swore they'd already passed the same fallen log minutes earlier, despite walking in a straight line. Time stretched, folded. By afternoon, confusion crept in. One man claimed his watch had stopped for 20 minutes without explanation. Another insisted the sun had jumped in the sky. A woman sat down suddenly, overwhelmed by the feeling that she'd forgotten something important, something she couldn't name. No one spoke openly about these things. They didn't need to. Ravenwood understood the unspoken rule. If you acknowledged the wrongness, it grew stronger. At the edge of Whispering Woods, the ground felt off, not unstable, not soft, just subtly misaligned, as if the forest existed half a step out of sync with the rest of the world. Several volunteers turned back without realizing why. Others reported headaches, nausea, a sudden sense of dread that made it impossible to continue. And always, there was the sense of being watched, not from the trees, from between them. Ethan's mother stayed by the house. She paced the living room, clutching his sketchbook like a lifeline. She flipped through the pages again and again, searching for meaning she hadn't wanted to see before. The drawings were no longer random. They were sequential, a progression, the house, the woods, the door, and then nothing, a blank page. As evening approached, the search stalled completely. No one admitted it out loud, but something had shifted. The urgency drained away, replaced by a heavy, resigned quiet. People lingered without purpose, as if waiting for instructions that never came. The forest did not give Ethan back, and the town, slowly and reluctantly, began to accept that this was not a disappearance in the usual sense. That night, Ravenwood slept poorly. Dreams came thick and tangled. People dreamed of walking through familiar streets that led nowhere, of opening doors that opened into other rooms instead of outside, of hearing footsteps behind them that never quite caught up. Several children woke screaming. They all described the same thing: a boy standing in the dark, watching, waiting. The next morning, something new appeared in Whispering Woods. A path. It hadn't been there before. Not carved, not trampled, pressed into the ground as if something heavy had passed through without touching the surface. It led inward, and then it vanished, dissolving into leaf litter and shadow. The search was officially called off 3 days later. Ravenwood told itself the story it needed to survive. A child wandered off. A storm disoriented him. The woods are dangerous. But the town never put up flyers, never held a proper vigil, never spoke Ethan's name too loudly, because on some level everyone understood you don't mourn what might still be listening. And somewhere beyond the edge of the world they knew, Ethan Vale was not lost. He was learning where he had gone. The hollow did not announce itself. It never did. There was no threshold to cross, no moment where Ethan felt he had arrived. One instant, the world folded inward, and the next, he was somewhere that looked familiar in the way a half-remembered dream looks familiar. A version of Ravenwood stretched around him. But it was wrong. The sky above was a dull, ash-grey, unmoving and heavy, like a ceiling pressed too low. Light existed here, but it behaved strangely, spreading unevenly, pooling in corners, stretching into long streaks that clung to surfaces like liquid. Buildings sagged inward as if tired. Windows were dark. Doors hung open to rooms that felt abandoned by time rather than people. Ethan stood perfectly still. Fear would have made him visible. Calm made him blend. He looked down at his feet. The ground beneath him was solid, but it felt older, as if it remembered things long erased from the surface world. With every step he took, faint impressions appeared behind him, then faded, as though the place could not decide whether to keep him. His shadow was wrong. It no longer matched his shape. It stretched too far, then recoiled, then split briefly into overlapping versions of itself. The hollow was testing the connection. Ethan moved carefully, guided not by sight, but by instinct. Paths revealed themselves as he walked, subtle bends in the air, shifts in the way the light leaned. Sound behaved differently here. Footsteps echoed before he made them. Whispers arrived before thoughts finished forming. Sometimes he heard his own breathing from somewhere behind him, slightly delayed. He did not turn around. He knew better. The first thing he encountered was his house, or something like it. It stood at the end of Pine Lantern Road, exactly where it should be, and yet completely wrong. The paint peeled inward instead of outward. The windows reflected nothing. The front door hung ajar, breathing softly with each invisible current of air. Ethan approached slowly. With each step, the feeling intensified, the sensation of being observed not by eyes, but by memory itself. He stepped inside. The house was empty. No furniture, no photographs, no warmth. The walls were stained with shadow, as if something had passed through them repeatedly, leaving residue behind. In the living room, a television sat on the floor, screen cracked, humming faintly. It showed static. Then an image flickered into place. Ethan's bedroom, from an angle that didn't exist. He turned away. The hollow did not want him distracted. As he stepped back outside, he noticed the trees. They lined the street, tall and skeletal, their branches twisting into shapes that looked almost like hands, frozen mid-reach. Some leaned toward him, others leaned away. This place responded to attention. Ethan remembered that. He kept walking, further from the town, closer to the center. Time unraveled. Minutes stretched into something longer, or shorter, or both. It was impossible to tell. His thoughts looped occasionally, repeating themselves until he forced them forward. Then he felt it, the presence, not a figure, not a shape, an awareness that filled the space without occupying it. The murmur. It did not speak, it reflected. Memories brushed against Ethan's mind, not his own, but echoes left behind by others who had passed through thin places. Regret, fear, unspoken thoughts pressed back onto themselves. He saw flashes of children who weren't him, faces blurred, shadows stretched, a girl with eyes glowing faintly in the dark, a boy whose body flickered like a broken signal, a woman who smiled too calmly. They had all been noticed, and now so had he. The murmur leaned closer, not physically, but conceptually, like a thought that suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. "You can hear us," it seemed to say. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." The hollow responded by opening further. The world around him warped. The ground sloped downward without changing elevation. The sky fractured into layers. Somewhere nearby, footsteps sounded, though no one appeared. "Where am I?" Ethan asked aloud. The answer came not as words, but as understanding, between what was and what remembers being. He absorbed this without panic. The hollow did not reward fear. "You've been watching me," he said. "We have been waiting," came the reply, not spoken, but impressed upon him like a pressure against the chest. Ethan felt the cost then, a subtle pull, a request. Leaving would require something in return, time, memory, a piece of himself. The hollow was always hungry. He thought of his mother, of Pine Lantern Road, of the life he might never return to. "I'll come back," he said, more to himself than to the presence. "I won't stay." The murmur did not argue. It never lied. "Everyone leaves," it answered. "Not everyone returns whole." Something shifted in the distance. A door humming softly, the same one from his drawings. The hollow was showing him the way. And Ethan, understanding now that this place had been shaping him long. Before he arrived, took a step forward, not because he was forced, because he had been prepared. Time did not break in the hollow. It softened, bent, slid sideways when no one was looking. Ethan realized this gradually, the way one realizes a dream is wrong only after trying to remember how it began. He walked for what felt like minutes and felt older when he stopped. He stood still for what felt like hours and felt no time pass at all. The hollow did not measure moments. It measured attention. Every step he took pulled memory toward him. Memories not his own, drifting loose like leaves in still water. He saw flashes of Ravenwood at different ages layered over one another. The diner new and bright, then boarded up. The arcade alive with sound, then silent and gutted. The school hallway full, then empty, then full again with faces that did not belong to any single year. He learned quickly not to linger. Stillness attracted echoes. When he paused too long, footsteps appeared without. Bodies. A rhythmic sound behind him that matched his own pace perfectly, yet never overtook him. When he turned his head even slightly, the sound stopped. The hollow punished curiosity. Ahead, the world repeated itself. The same intersection appeared twice, 3 times, each slightly altered. In one version, a stop sign leaned to the left. In another, it lay twisted on the ground. In the third, it bore a date scratched into the metal, 1986. Ethan did not remember scratching it, but his hand tingled as if it had. He understood then what the hollow did with time. It layered it, stacked moments on top of one another until cause and effect blurred into something circular. What had happened here could still happen. What would happen had already left a trace. That was how the hollow fed, on regret that never resolved, on fear that never found an ending. He moved toward the humming door he had seen before. It stood at the base of a shallow slope that should not have existed. The ground dipped downward, though the horizon remained flat. Trees lined the path, their branches curled inward, frozen mid-reach like hands halted just before touching. As Ethan walked, his shadow began to fragment, not splitting cleanly, overlapping. 3 versions of it moved with him now. One matched his pace, one lagged, one walked slightly ahead, stretching toward the door. He felt a pull toward that forward shadow. It felt older, more certain. "You're not me," he said softly. The shadow did not respond, but it slowed. The door stood open when he reached it. Beyond it lay a version of his street again, Pine Lantern Road, but emptied of colour, drained to ash and grey. Houses sagged inward as if exhausted by standing for so long. Windows reflected movement that wasn't there, and the air. The air felt crowded. This place had been passed through many times. Ethan stepped through the doorway. Immediately the world lurched. He was no longer alone. Figures moved at the edges of his vision. Children, mostly. Some flickered like broken frames of film. Others appeared too solid, too sharply defined. They did not look at him. They looked past him, as if watching something else arrive. One boy sat on a curb that no longer existed, knees drawn to his chest. His outline shimmered, phasing in and out. "Do you know how long it's been?" the boy asked suddenly. Ethan hesitated. "No," he said. The boy smiled faintly. "Me neither." Then he vanished. Ethan felt the weight of that exchange settle into him, a warning disguised as conversation. Here, time did not heal. It accumulated. As he moved deeper, memories began to bleed into him, uninvited, insistent. He remembered running down Pine Lantern Road at night, though he knew he hadn't yet. He remembered standing in the woods years older than he was now. He remembered returning. These were not visions of the future. They were echoes of paths the hollow had already traced. A pressure built in his chest. Not pain, a cost tallying itself. He felt something slip, just slightly, a detail he could not quite recall anymore, the exact sound of his mother's laugh, the smell of his house after rain. He stopped walking. The hollow noticed. The ground beneath him rippled. Footsteps approached, multiple this time, circling without form. The shadows thickened, leaning inward, pressing closer. Movement keeps you intact, the hollow impressed upon him. Ethan forced himself forward. The door hummed again, louder now, vibrating through his bones. Beyond it, something waited. Not the murmur, not entirely. A convergence. A place where the hollow folded tightest, where shadows stacked and time compressed. As he approached, the shadows ahead of him merged into a single, elongated shape, taller than him, narrower, more precise. It turned. For the first time since arriving, Ethan felt fear. Not because it was threatening, because it was familiar. The shape tilted its head the same way he did. "You're what happens if I stay," Ethan said. The shadow did not deny it. It stepped aside. The door opened fully. Ethan crossed the threshold, and somewhere far above, in a world where time still pretended to move in straight lines, Ravenwood slept, unaware that a version of its missing child was already learning how to come back. Ethan returned without sound. No flash of light, no tearing of the air. One moment, the edge of whispering woods stood empty. The next, a boy stepped out between the trees. It was just after dawn. Mist clung low to the ground, drifting in thin sheets across the forest floor. Birds had not yet returned. The town lay still, suspended between night and morning. Ethan walked calmly, not stumbling, not searching, as if he knew exactly where he was going. A man driving early for work slowed his car when he saw the boy. He rolled down the window, heart hammering, ready to shout, to ask if Ethan was hurt, if he needed help. Before he could speak, something happened. A memory surfaced, not his own. He suddenly remembered a childhood summer he'd never lived, the smell of old carpet, a hallway light flickering, the feeling of being watched from behind a door. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. Ethan passed the car without looking at him. The memory faded as quickly as it came, leaving behind a hollow ache, like something important had almost been remembered. By the time the man found his voice, Ethan was already halfway down Pine Lantern Road. The house stood exactly as it had been left. Window boarded, curtains replaced, fear sealed behind polite routines. Ethan paused at the front door. For the first time since stepping out of the woods, uncertainty flickered across his face. Not because he didn't recognize the house, because he recognized too many versions of it. He raised his hand and knocked. Inside, his mother froze. The sound traveled through her like a shock. She hadn't allowed herself to imagine this moment. Not fully. Hope was too dangerous. She opened the door slowly. Ethan stood on the porch, clothes clean but wrong, too dry for a boy who'd vanished in a storm. His hair lay flat, as if untouched by wind. His eyes were darker, not in color, but in depth. He looked older, not by years, by experience. She pulled him into her arms before she could think. He didn't resist, but he didn't cling either. "It's quieter here," he said softly into her shoulder. She laughed and cried at once, holding him tighter, afraid he might disappear again if she let go. Behind him, on the porch, his shadow hesitated. For just a moment, it did not follow him inside. Then it slipped forward and split. No one else saw it. Inside the house, time struggled to reassert itself. Questions came slowly. Where had he been? Was he hurt? Had someone taken him? Ethan answered simply. "I got lost," he said. It was the truest lie he could tell. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, Pine Lantern Road buzzed with restrained energy. Neighbors stopped by with food, with questions they pretended were casual. They watched Ethan closely, searching for signs of trauma. They noticed the small things instead. How he recognized people he'd never met. How he finished sentences others hadn't started. How electronics glitched when he entered a room. A woman dropped a plate when Ethan passed her in the hallway. For a split second, she remembered her father, dead for 20 years, standing in the doorway of her childhood bedroom. Then the image vanished. Ethan didn't look back. At school, the desks felt smaller. The hallways felt narrower. The mirrors lingered too long on his reflection. His shadow behaved most of the time, keeping pace, staying attached. But sometimes, when he wasn't thinking about it, it leaned in the wrong direction. Toward the woods, toward places where the air felt thinner. Children began dreaming of him before they saw him. They dreamed of a boy standing at the edge of their rooms, calm and silent, not threatening, just watching, waiting. When they woke, they felt like something important had been forgotten. The town tried to move on. Ravenwood always did. But something had changed. The hollow had not let Ethan leave untouched. It had marked him. He no longer belonged fully to one side or the other. And deep beneath the town, the murmur stirred, pleased. Because the door had not closed behind him. It had learned how to open both ways. Ravenwood began dreaming the same dream. It did not happen all at once. It never does. At first, it was only a few children, waking in the night with the same quiet certainty that someone had been standing in their room. Not looming, not threatening, just present. They described him the same way every time. A boy, their age, or a little older, standing near the doorway or the window or the darkest corner of the room. He never spoke. He never moved. He simply watched, as if waiting for them to remember something important. Parents dismissed it as stress, nightmares, a reaction to the storm, the blackout, the disappearance that had become town gossip. But the dreams spread. Teenagers began to have them next, then adults, then people who hadn't dreamed in years. They dreamed of Pine Lantern Road, of walking down it in silence while streetlights flickered overhead, of seeing their own houses, but empty, of passing a boy on the sidewalk who looked at them with recognition, like he knew them better than they knew themselves. They woke with the same sensation every time. Loss, not of a person, of a memory that should have been theirs. Ethan noticed before anyone else said it out loud. He felt it when people looked at him too long, when their eyes lingered unfocused, as if searching their own minds, when they flinched suddenly, overcome by emotions they couldn't place. Guilt, regret, a sadness without a source. These things followed him now, not intentionally, not maliciously. They were simply pulled, loose in his presence, like dust shaken free from old books. At school, a teacher forgot the name of her first child while looking directly at Ethan. She laughed it off, but went home shaken, staring at family photos that felt strangely unfamiliar. At the grocery store, a man dropped his keys and stood frozen for nearly a minute, reliving a moment from his youth, standing outside a closed door, too afraid to knock. Ethan learned to keep his head down, to move slowly, to avoid crowded spaces, because the closer people got to him, the more the hollow reached back through him. And then Black Vale noticed. They did not arrive with sirens or badges, no uniforms, no official letters. They came as maintenance workers, inspectors, men and women who asked too many questions with voices that stayed too calm. They watched the house from parked cars that never stayed long enough to be obvious. They took notes when lights flickered, when cameras glitched, when Ethan passed too close. Ethan sensed them before he saw them. Their attention felt sharp, focused, hungry in a different way. One evening, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and watched his reflection carefully. This time, it did not lag. It moved with him, too perfectly. "You sent them," Ethan said quietly, not to his reflection, but to the presence that lingered behind his thoughts. The hollow did not deny it. It never lied. Black Vale tried to observe him directly. The first camera they installed malfunctioned within minutes, its feed dissolving into shadow static that bent and twisted until nothing recognizable remained. The second camera recorded something worse. Ethan walking down the hallway, then Ethan walking down the hallway again, a second behind the first. The footage ended abruptly. After that, they tried proximity. One agent approached him at the edge of the playground, pretending to check a clipboard. "Ethan Vale," she said gently, "how have you been feeling lately?" He looked at her, and for just a moment she saw something reflected in his eyes. Not darkness, depth. She staggered back, overwhelmed by a flood of memories that weren't hers. Locked rooms, humming lights, children crying behind reinforced glass. She resigned 2 days later without explanation. Black Vale adjusted their strategy. They did not try to take him. Not yet. They waited, because the hollow was doing something unprecedented. It was not pulling Ethan back. It was pushing outward through him. The town changed subtly. Whispering zones appeared, places where voices murmured just below hearing. The old water tower groaned at night, metal flexing like it was breathing. Mirrors lingered on reflections just a beat too long. And always, the dreams. The dreams grew clearer. People began to see more than just Ethan. They saw the place behind him, ash-colored skies, buildings bending inward, trees shaped like hands. Some woke with red marks on their palms, as if they'd been holding something too tightly. Children drew pictures of doors they'd never seen. Ethan watched all of this with quiet understanding. He knew the cost now. Leaving the hollow had taken something from him. Returning had given it access. One night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the hum beneath Ravenwood returned, low and steady, like a distant engine starting. He sat up. His shadow did not. It slid off the bed and stood upright on the wall, elongated and precise. "You said it would be quieter," the shadow whispered. Ethan swallowed. "It is," he replied. The shadow smiled. Somewhere beneath the town, the murmur leaned closer, because the bridge had been built, and it was no longer satisfied with one crossing. The tape surfaced years later, not during the searches, not during the interviews, not even during the quiet years when Ravenwood pretended nothing had changed. It appeared when the town had grown comfortable again, when memories had dulled just enough to be survivable. A box was found during renovations to the abandoned radio station on the edge of town. Old equipment, burnt-out reels, cassette cases warped by heat, and one VHS tape. No label, no date, only a strip of masking tape on the side, yellowed with age, bearing a single handwritten note. Play last. No one remembered putting it there. They almost didn't play it. Almost. The footage began with static, thick, layered, crawling across the screen like something alive. The image rolled twice, colors bleeding, sound warping in and out of sync. Then it stabilized. Ethan appeared. He sat on a chair in a small, windowless room. The walls were bare concrete. The light above him flickered softly, stretching and compressing in a way that made it difficult to tell how much time passed between blinks. He looked calm, older than he should have been. Not physically, something else. He stared directly into the camera, not at the lens, but through it, as if aware of everyone who would one day watch. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "They told me to record this," he said. A pause, not silence, just the faint hum beneath the sound, like something breathing slowly. "I don't know when you're seeing it," Ethan continued, "or if it's already too late." The camera flickered. For a fraction of a second, Ethan appeared behind him, taller, thinner, standing just out of focus. Then it was gone. "I came back," he said. "That part is true." He folded his hands in his lap. His shadow moved first. But not everything did. The light above him dimmed, stretching into long streaks along the walls. The room seemed larger now, deeper than it had been a moment before. "I thought leaving would close it," Ethan said quietly. "I thought once I crossed back, it would stop listening." He shook his head slowly. "It doesn't work like that." The hum grew louder. The camera trembled slightly, as if reacting to something off-screen. "He didn't stay behind," Ethan said. This time his voice wavered, not with fear, with understanding. "He came back with me." Behind him, the shadow detached completely. It stretched upward, elongating until it brushed the ceiling. Its edges bled into the darkness, shape unstable, never quite settling. The shadow leaned closer to the camera. The image warped. Static poured across the screen in thick waves, but Ethan's face remained clear, too clear. "You won't see him at first," Ethan continued. "You'll hear him in the quiet places, in the pauses between thoughts, in the moments you almost remember something important." The camera cut briefly, then resumed from a slightly different angle. Time had jumped. Ethan looked more tired now. "Children hear him easiest," he said. "They always do." A distant sound echoed through the recording, footsteps with no rhythm. "They call him different names," Ethan went on. "But it doesn't matter. Names are just anchors." The shadow behind him pulsed. The walls bent inward slightly. "He's still here," Ethan said. The tape began to distort violently. "He's learning." The hum surged. The image fractured. Overlapping frames, repeated seconds, time folding in on itself. Just before the screen dissolved entirely into shadow static, Ethan leaned forward and spoke one last time. "He's listening now." The tape cut to black. No static, no sound, just darkness. The VHS player refused to eject the tape. When power was cut, the screen briefly reflected the room, and in it, a shadow stood where no one else did. The tape was sealed away. The radio station was boarded up again. Ravenwood returned to its routines, but some things never fully returned to sleep. Lights still flicker on Pine Lantern Road. Children still dream of doors. Mirrors still hesitate before reflecting. And sometimes, late at night, when the town grows very quiet, a boy-shaped shadow can be seen standing at the edge of whispering woods, waiting, because the hollow is patient, and it never forgets the ones who learned how to come